If you have ever had a problem and needed to contact the legal hotline at NC Realtors, you have probably talked to this guy. Today, I sit down with John Waite. He's legal counsel to NC Realtors. He's a real estate attorney in Winston-Salem, and he is behind the scenes implementing our North Carolina forms changes. So if you're a real estate agent, this episode is going to be extremely informative. Stay tuned while I talk to John Waite. Welcome, John Waite, to the Real Estate Show. I am so excited about this. You are the first person that I've reached out to be a guest on the podcast when I'm like, hey, I know you don't know me, but I think you would really help the listeners. And graciously, you agreed to come. So thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Partner at Martin & Gifford PLLC. Where's that?
It's in Winston-Salem.
Yeah. We've got, I think most of the people that watch us are in North Carolina, but there are some outside. Okay. So Winston-Salem, North Carolina, North Carolinian, just like me. But you have a really interesting background. When I was looking at your firm bio, I'm like, he's done a lot. I mean, the philosophy thing, math, mayor. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I'll start with philosophy. I was a math major for 3 years. And then I used to have dinner every night in college with the philosophy professors. And these guys were just like, you know how they can be. They're just engaging. They're interesting. Mm-hmm. And eventually they somehow conned me into changing my major the summer before my senior year.
Oh my goodness.
And of course my parents, they're farmers, and they were like, you're going to major in what?
In thinking?
Yes. But, their pitch to me was, listen, we are going to teach you to think and write. And you're going to grad school anyway. And I was like, I'm going to grad school. I didn't know this, Anyway, so that's how I ended up majoring in philosophy. And the thing is, once you major in philosophy, and I did finish a minor in math, but there's no jobs for people who just want to sit around and think. People don't pay you to do that.
Right.
So law school was always kind of on my mind, and that's how I ended up at law school. But after undergrad, I had to take a break. I was burnt out. And so I moved down here. That's how I moved down here from Michigan. And I worked at a wilderness camp for at-risk youth for 3.5 years. Then I taught math for a little while before I went to law school. So.
Yeah. Teaching math, that would be, I think if I wasn't a lawyer, I would want to be a professor or a math teacher. I love math. I did the accidental, well, yours wasn't accidental, but I did the accidental math minor. So it was like all my electives are math. And then eventually they're like, you're really close to doing this. So I identify with that and appreciate the math brain a little bit. Can you tell me about being the mayor of Clemens? That is not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, no, it kind of was for me. And I guess I'll tell anybody who may be listening to your podcast, if you want to get involved in politics, it's totally possible. For me, I just lived in my neighborhood, and the mayor at the time lived in my neighborhood. And he was a guy actually a little bit younger than me. And he just came up to me one day and he was like, hey, you want to run for village council? And I live in Clemens, North Carolina, which is near Winston-Salem. And I was like, all right, I'll think about it. And so I was thinking about it, and I was like, all right, yeah, sure. There was an issue going on at the time, and it was, in particular, they wanted to build a median on a certain street in town, and everybody was mad about it. Well, some people loved it, some people hated it. There was no real in between, right? Yeah. And that was kind of the issue at the time. And then he called me a day or two later, and he's like, actually, do you want to run for mayor instead? And I was like,
a little bit of a leap, but okay.
I was like, all right, sure. Why not? And that was pretty much it. And the interesting thing is, once I got digging into it, there was so many more things to it than just the campaign was, self-titled Stop the Median. So I was on the Stop the Median side, not all the way. I won't go into details, but for me, building a median all the way through this particular district of town just didn't make sense. Not by the traffic numbers or anything. Anyway, but besides that, there's also this issue of transparency. And doing some small things. I was trying to research what the council had already done. And it was almost impossible because they were uploading PDFs to the website that didn't have any text backing on them. And so I was having to actually read through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of documents instead of being able to do a Control F search, whatever. So after I got elected the first term, that was one of the first simple things I did was we are going to sign things electronically, and we are going to sign things that you can actually search and just increase the transparency, easy things like that, you know? And also Clemens is a relatively new town. I think it was incorporated in 1986. And so there's a lot of other procedures that need to be done. But anyway, So that's how I got into politics. And then it's a 2-year term for mayor. So the first term was 2017 to 2019. Not a whole lot. I mean, a lot happened, but it wasn't anything, that people probably in your podcast know about. But I got elected to the second term in 2019. Well, 2020 was right after that. And so you can actually go back through news articles. Clemens was one of the first towns to actually have a COVID order because I just drafted it.
Yeah.
like I just went in and did it and filed at the same time that Charlotte and some of the big towns did before the governor put his order in, and then, the rest is history. But anyway, so that's how I got in, and it wasn't like a lot of thought even put into it. Somebody just asked me to serve, and so I just did.
Yeah, that's well, it kind of speaks to who you are as a person then, because your willingness to step up and step into the life of public service while you have all of this other stuff going on, that's commendable. And it takes a little bit of bravery. I mean, you're being casual about it. You're probably a humble guy, but that's really cool. So the thing about the term being 2 years, it's so hard to get stuff done in 2 years.
Oh yeah.
It seems like a long time if you don't have, some finite term that you've got to try to accomplish things in. But when that's all the time you have and there's no guarantee you're going to get more of it, it's not the easiest thing to try to get a bunch of people on the same page and move things along. But it sounds like you're able to get some cool stuff done.
Yeah. I mean, it is a very short turnaround because basically you're just always campaigning. But, Clemens is a very interesting town. I love living there. But, locally, politically, they like to keep a tight leash on their politicians. And so, like if they don't like what you're doing, every 2 years, you can flip the entire council and the mayor. And that's how they like it.
Yes.
And so
the people are in charge.
Yeah, they like that accountability. But as far as the timing goes on this, my kids were all really little but mostly school age. And so and I was new at Martin and Gifford. Like I before that, I have had mostly a criminal defense practice, and I did a lot of appellate work because my first job was at the Court of Appeals in Raleigh, clerking for a judge for a year and a half, 2 judges. But so I was transitioning into this real estate brokerage space, which was a whole ocean of law I didn't even know existed before 2015. So about 10 years ago. And so I had the time and capacity to do it. Although the second term, by that time, I was starting to really build things, and it was a stretch to be able to do it. But I will say this: anybody who has kids sports like soccer or volleyball, I don't even care what it is. It could be music too. But once your kids hit that age where they're starting doing those things, I couldn't imagine doing it now.
Right.
I just couldn't imagine it with one kid doing soccer and another kid just starting volleyball. And my oldest is graduating high school this year. That's a whole, the whole college thing is an ordeal and a half.
Yes.
So
it's like adding another full-time job for you, just keeping them on track where they need to go.
Or just driving if they can't drive yet.
Right.
I got 3 that can't drive yet, and the oldest can, but she's at a boarding school, and so she doesn't.
Yeah, she can't.
I still have to go back and forth because she can't let have a car there. So yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can totally see, because in Mooresville, we're not small, but we're not the biggest town either. But that the job of mayor is, it's taking up a lot of time. So for that to be a full-time job, but then you also have a full-time job, and that job is that of an attorney, and you're acting as counsel to some big organizations, the balancing it all is probably something that you trial and error a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, I for sure. And I don't know, especially when I was solo practice for so long, you get used to working nights, and you make it work even if you don't like it.
Yeah.
But
you just do what you have to do. It's the same thing when your kid's sick in the middle of the night. You got to change the bed sheets whether you're tired or not.
Oh yeah.
I totally get that. So coming to Martin and Gifford, you're learning a new area of law from something that you've been engrossed in before, and changing gears. How did you get hooked up with the North Carolina Association of Realtors? What are you doing with them now? Give me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so our law firm is based in Winston-Salem, and I kind of practice in that area, and they put out an advertisement in 2015 saying, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to come in," because at that time So my one law partner, Bill Gifford, he was in-house counsel with what's now Clayton Homes. But it was a different, it was somebody else before that. Yeah, Oakwood Homes. Yes. He was with Oakwood Homes. He was in-house counsel. Eventually they were bought out by Clayton. And then my other law partner, he's retired now, but Will Martin, he had been in-house counsel with NC Realtors, but then had founded this firm with Bill and was still doing general counsel work as outside counsel. And there's, so NC Realtors was a client of the firm when he transitioned. When I came in, it used to be the NC Realtors work. The main things that we do for NC Realtors as their outside, kind of general counsel, the heaviest lift is the legal hotline. So if you're one of the, I don't know what the number is today, 57,000, 58,000 realtors in the state, you can call the NC Realtors legal hotline. We usually get to people same day, although depending on the volume, it's difficult. Like just me yesterday, like we break the hotline days up into half sessions. So I took everything in the morning yesterday, but that was 35 calls and emails.
Yeah.
So if you get an afternoon that's about the same, then sometimes we can't get to people same day, but we try. And especially if somebody emails with something bizarre that I got to research, like if I got to do some actual digging on something, then, obviously it might take, a little bit more time. But so that's probably the thing that takes the most amount of time that we do for them. The other thing that I do in my role is I sit on the committees that help write the forms, and I suggest changes for them and draft them, and then these committees vote on forms changes. So that's how we got involved with them and what they do. I also teach a legal risks class for them. That's really good. That's a 4-hour CE class. And it's basically like if you're a BIC and you've got young agents who really need to know what are some of the major pitfalls, then it's really a class focused on that, agency agreements and scams and disclosure, things like that, like major brokerage topics. But pretty much everything else that we do also sort of exists in this brokerage space. We don't do any real estate closings. Almost everything we do is, real estate agent related, like licensed defense of the real estate commission and stuff like that. So,
yeah. So you touch on every area of it from kind of beginning to hopefully not the end. Hopefully you win the licensing defense, but potentially the end too, spanning the career of an agent too. The forms are super interesting to me because this is my first opportunity to talk to someone whose, brain the words came out of. And, I know you've got the input from the committees, but if you're the person having to get the words on the page, man, I'm just mentally making a list of after this podcast is over, every word I want or phrase I want to ask you about of making sure I know what it means, because I feel like the contracts, I have to commend you and the forms committees. I think they're easy to understand.
Oh, that's good.
I think that especially for attorneys, it's not like the most plain language contract in the world, but you can't really do that when you've got a complicated scenario like a real estate transaction. But the language is plain and understandable. It's, you can't really take a lot of the clauses more than one way. And I appreciate that as a closing attorney, because if somebody's calling me saying, oh, I get to do XYZ, the contract says that. I'm like, but it really clearly does not say that. Yeah. So if you're saying that it does this, it's because you haven't read it. Anybody who reads it can tell. So thank you for that. It makes my job easier. And I know the forms changing, as frequently as they have had to the last year has probably been adding a lot to your plate. So what has the last 12 months or so been like for you? Maybe even longer, because you had some anticipation of the settlement coming. Yeah.
Well, first, let me give credit to the people who came before me, like my partner, Will Martin, and these forms committee members. They volunteer a whole day a month to come in person and discuss forms changes. Like, these people are really dedicated to making sure that, when there's an issue, either in the industry, locally, whatever, they take into account, different markets across the state. They bring input from across the state. You got people driving to stay overnight from the mountains or from literally the Outer Banks, just to sit for a whole day and talk about the forms. Like, these people are like, the volunteers who do this certainly cannot be, their contribution can't be understated for me. And I couldn't even propose language without their input.
Right.
Because I don't practice brokerage. So for me, it's really a listening session and trying to help, people. Let's try to make this in lawyer terms that works and operates for you to solve whatever issue's going on. But so as far as the existing contract, I'm really just standing on the shoulders of hundreds and hundreds of people who've put in thousands. I don't even know how many hours. But anyway.
Well, we appreciate you carrying it forward.
I'm just trying to be a good steward while I'm here. Like, that's it. But in any event, let's start in October of 23. When that jury verdict came out, my whole life upended. I didn't take a vacation in 24. I worked just the hours. It was a lot, because not only do we represent the State Association of Realtors, but we also represent a lot of local boards of realtors. Yeah. And some of them have MLSs, like they still operate their own. They're not part of the larger regional ones. And so they got to do their own changes. You're talking about bylaws, MLS rules, everything. Yeah. And not just that, but there were also parts, when the settlement came out. So you had the jury verdict in October 23. Then, on the Ides of March, I don't know if that's irony or not, but they released the settlement, right? And the settlement itself, everyone's like, what does this even mean? I mean, talk about drafting something that, like, I'm sure they did their best to address the issue that they were trying to settle. Fine. I don't think that there was I don't think they could even anticipate a lot of the questions that were going to come out of that. And really, it was up to us here on the ground to fill in these gaps. So last year when we did the form, we had already wrapped up the form cycle when they dropped the settlement.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So we had to reopen it. And
that was a tight turnaround.
Yeah, and try and figure out, because usually the new forms changes come out July 1st, and these new MLS rules are supposed to go in August. So it was a scramble by everybody, including me, to, number one, all right, well, I got to go from zero to expert in this and then make some suggestions. But also, if you're just talking about the agency agreements, you're talking about agency agreements that were designed for a completely now non-existent system. All right, and these were otherwise good forms, I thought. I think there was a reason why North Carolina didn't have a copycat antitrust case. And I think it's because the forms were pretty good about explaining to the consumer, hey, this is what's going on, right? So, and because I really felt that about the current agency agreements, as we've gone through the last year and rewritten the exclusive buyer agency, rewritten the listing agreement, really trying to keep an eye on that. All right, let's make these accessible for members, but also consumers. Like, for example, the dual agency section now has a little blurb that explains dual agency that wasn't there before. And that's because when I bought my first house in Clemens, I sat down at the kitchen table with the guy who was, helping me buy my first house my second house in Clemens. And I said, hey, all right, so what number do I need to put in this contract to get this house? Like, what? Yeah. what number do I got to put in here? And he's like, I can't tell you that. I was like, well, you're here at my kitchen table, and I think you're my agent. So what do you mean you can't tell me? And it wasn't until years later that I joined Martin and Gifford and started learning about all this stuff. He was a dual agent. I just didn't know it.
Right.
I was a lawyer. Yeah. I read through the whole thing. It's not like I didn't read it, but that particular section, I mean, a lot of the other sections, fine. Yeah, I understood it. But when it came to dual agency, and I think maybe you shared this with me, dual agency just still breaks my mind a little bit as an attorney. Yes. You just can't imagine it.
Yes, I agree with you.
So, and that's probably why it didn't click with me. Like, you're my agent. What do you mean you can, also represent the other side within certain parameters? Anyway, so that little blurb, even though the form is much shorter, almost half the length now, inserting things like that to really help give people a basic understanding of a really difficult topic.
Yes.
And that blurb is really, all right, if I'm at my kitchen table, what do I need to say to me to be like, all right, this is what's happening.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And that also happened to me in a different context with a closing. I was in litigation before I was in real estate, and I went to my own closing, and the closing attorney knew that I was an attorney. I think my agent told him, and he just slid me the paper and was like, yep, just knock when you're done signing. I'll make sure, I verify all the signatures. We leave, and my husband asked me, what just happened? I'm not entirely sure. He's like, you're the attorney. You're supposed to know this. I'm like, well, I'm feeling pretty dumb right now because I don't exactly know what happened. And so when I got into real estate, I kind of resolved that I didn't want anyone leaving my closing table feeling that way. Mm-hmm. So it changed how I explained the documents. I didn't make any assumptions about what people knew and didn't know. And I think those types of experiences really shape how we practice law. And I've also noticed it wasn't in in 24's form change. In 23, there's a change to like the good title paragraph about their, free of material title defects. Yeah, and I remember reading the comments, and I'm like, I bet this is about fences. And I'm reading the comments, and it's like trying to prevent contracts from blowing up over 6-inch
fence encroachment.
Yeah. And I was so grateful for that because we see it, and that also speaks to the committees getting together and talking about, hey, we had, everything was going great. The buyer gets the survey and sees this. They want it out anyway. They just use this as a way to try to get their money back, Yeah. So I really appreciated that change. Thank you guys for doing that. The forms are super interesting to me just because they're so comprehensive. And when the settlement happened and hearing from people that maybe watched the YouTube channel, they'd say, we don't know what we're going to do. We don't have a buyer agency agreement. And that blew my mind. Yeah. Because I'm not licensed in any other states. I don't do anything in any other states. And I thought, how could you not? But that's another reason why I'm grateful to North Carolina and how we've operated and, the rules that the commission has, the way that the committees have worked together. Because yes, there are plenty of big changes we are dealing with, but not nearly as many as some of the other states.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting you have a litigation background. And now do you primarily do real estate closings? Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what, when you have a litigation background and then you move to more transactional, or in my case, this facilitating transactional documents, I think your brain just works a little bit different because you and I know what it's like to go into court and have either an opposing counsel or a judge completely not understand anything about this form. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And the interesting thing and the thing I've always loved about the forms, until I got into this role a couple of years ago, which for me was like 3 years ago when Will retired, then I moved more into this space. Before that, I spent almost all my time litigating forms or litigating things in the brokerage space. And I can tell you with forms, when they get in court, once you can teach somebody what's there, they work very well.
Yes.
And so as we've been going through these big changes the last couple of years, for me, it's really keeping an eye on that of, all right, where might we end up in a litigation context and what needs to happen, in order for the form to continue to work the way that it has, the same kind of efficacy of the form.
Yeah, I appreciate that you use that, and when you guys are working on the drafting, because it makes a difference. It's litigation costs are going to go up if a form doesn't do what you want it to do, or what at least one party thought it was going to do. So the changes, there was a recent change in January to some of the forms, and then the cycle time on some of the forms changes the last year. There was October, January, and this is coming on the heels of July. We're coming up on some more forms changes in a couple months. Can you give any hints about what might be coming?
Oh, yeah. So the forms, depending on the form, it goes through an approval process that's more lengthy or short. But for forms that are just NC Realtors in-house forms, so like the agency agreements and things like that, those just have to go through the forms committee and then the executive committee of NC Realtors. They've already had those meetings. Those are done. We're in the final proofing of those. For joint forms like the offer to purchase a contract, like anything at the bottom where it says this is a joint form with NC Realtors and the North Carolina Bar Association Real Property section, those go through the Joint Forms Task Force, and then, which is a committee, like a mix of real estate attorneys and realtors. But those still have to be approved by the Bar Association Real Property section. That has not happened yet. So it's not final. But what I could preview for you, if all that stuff goes through, is that the offer to purchase is going to get a big refresh. Okay. It is going to be 3 pages shorter. That's all I could do this time. But
I can hear agents rejoicing. I'm like, I know you appreciate shorter, but that these things get added because something happened.
Sure. But the great thing about it is the reason it's shorter is because all the note boxes and the warning boxes, all that stuff is moved into the contract and simplified.
Oh, nice.
So everything that's good there should still be there. Like that's not, we're not getting rid of due diligence period or something like that. Like nothing crazy, like as far as the procedure and mechanics. It's just going to be shorter. And for me, readability is a big deal. Like, for example, if we could even get into the font and spacing and things like that, even more than what we have already, which if I quit rewriting forms, maybe I can get into a little bit more. But
love a lawyer who thinks about typography and readability.
For me, it's very, very important in order for people to be able to understand it. Because for me, it's about how many hotline calls am I going to have to field if an agent doesn't understand this?
Yes.
It has your ability to understand these things directly affects my day. Right?
Yes.
So that's always like in front of my mind.
And potentially your family's day too.
Sure, right. But the offer to purchase, it's shorter. The language will be worked in. Some of the sections have been, like the language has been greatly simplified, but the same principle is there. Obviously, if it's a warning box, it's an important warning. But does it need to be 10 sentences or can it be 2?
Yes.
So a lot of those changes. But the biggest thing is, as long as it meets final approval, is that the first page is going to be the parties, then it's going to be property description, then it's going to be the price breakdown like usual. But then at the bottom, instead of what's there now, at the bottom of the page is going to be the very next thing is going to be the seller concessions, and that'll be either a flat dollar amount or a percentage of the gross sales price. Under that will be the due diligence period end date, and then settlement.
I love that.
So that'll
you can look in one place and know the key elements of what needs to happen, who's paying what, and when it has to happen by. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I did it to the auction contract last year. So I think about these things in numbers because the forms they're like, depending on the first number, it's part of a series. So the 600 series is the auction forms. And that contract, I did it for them last year. Because in an auction, they get like 20 offers. And these terms, these important contract terms were scattered throughout 10, 11 pages, whatever it was, right? And so the auction people met with me last year and they're like, we just need to see.
Right.
We just need to know what it is. And I was
rather than digging, it's like a whole assembly line of somebody pick out the due diligence dates.
So anyway, I did it for them last year. I thought it was a really good change for them. The commercial contract, same thing. Try to get all the important terms on the first page. Anything else that's also important but doesn't, have to be like part of your closing disclosure, as a fundamental term. That stuff is all, still in there, but just push back a little bit.
My favorite form from last year's update, I think maybe this is an unsung hero, and I might be getting the number wrong. The 10T, the estate flowchart.
Oh, yeah.
So good. So we have one that we've made internally that we use for our team. And I was like, man, I wish I'm not going to publish this out to people, but I wish there was something that we could share. And that came out. I'm like, it's way better than the one I made. It's got all the FAQs on the back. Like, what happens if my seller dies in the middle of being under contract?
Yeah.
And so I kind of go around to some of the local groups after the forms come out and talk about the changes, and that's the one I always bring up. I'm like, I know this, you guys didn't ask about this, but you're going to need it. Save it to your references. You will need this. If you have a long enough career, you're going to deal with plenty of estate files, and look at this chart. So thank you for that. That's another one I'm super grateful for. And that's why I call it the unsung hero. because everybody's focused on the settlement stuff. And then you've got this really great resource that came out that kind of slid under the radar a bit.
Yeah, no, I like that one a lot. I like this whole flowchart trend we've been on last couple of years. I like a lot. And this is, I'm sure this is going to be the nerdiest part of this podcast by far. But that one in particular came from Bob Ramser, who's a closing attorney in Raleigh. He gave most of the meat of it, and I made it into like a flowchart. But the content was really his brainchild, and it was very good content to start with. But
this is making me really want to be on the forms committee.
You can be on Joint Forms Task Force; they'll take you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You join the real property section of the Bar Association. I'm sure you could be on there. But there's also so I get a lot of questions about property management and landlord tenant. I mean, that's probably at least a third of the hotline calls I get.
Oh, interesting.
And so one of the most complicated areas that I deal with, and this predated, this was the inspiration for the estate flowchart, was tenant personal property. It's scattered through like 3 or 4 different statutes. They're impossible to understand. They're super long and block text. Like, forget it. Like, every single time somebody asked me about tenant personal property left behind, I'd have to go through and spend 10 minutes like figuring it out.
Like, where exactly is
and
it?
So one day I just sat down and created my cheat sheet, right? But then last year I proposed it to the property management forms change committee. I was like, hey, you guys want a flowchart for this? And they're like, yes.
Yeah.
So was kind of like, I was like, oh man, we could do this with estates too. We could, then we ended up doing it with 220 when, just helping agents, and that, the guidelines to form 220, they don't really have very much to do with the form at all. The 220 is just a contract. Right. It's just meant to, I'm waiting for the day. Actually, I'm very worried about this. This keeps me up at night sometimes, but I'm waiting for the day when a Form 220 doesn't match a text message conversation. Like, agents are not being careful enough. You could have a binding contract for compensation that's not on 220 at all. And then you could end up in litigation about it. Yeah. So, what 220 is meant to give you, that written confirmation of whatever, the compensation is, right? But the guidelines to it, if you look at that, it's not about how to fill out the form like anything else. It is, how do you navigate cooperative compensation? Like, what are different ways you can do it under North Carolina law? Anybody else outside North Carolina, don't even bother looking at it because we do it very special here based on the license law here. And so we're navigating that.
I appreciate too, then when the forms changes came out, when the settlement happened, that a lot of the FAQs on NC Realtors were clear that there's no one right way to document compensation. Because people were getting really hung up on the Form 220 and do you have it? Do you not? So the being clear that, we've got this form for you to use. We like it. That's why we made it. But you got to be careful because you might have stepped in a landmine these other ways. Speaking of landmines, your hotline questions and calls, what are some of the things that you see, anything funny that you've encountered? What question do you answer over and over that you're like, please, I wish you guys would understand this and stop asking me? Whatever is on your mind about the hotline.
Yeah. Well, this just happened yesterday. Yesterday, 2 agents called me and they had me on speakerphone. And they were in an emergency situation where a tree crew was out trying to trim branches, but like HOA trees, common area, they're trying to trim branches, and a property owner was standing there blocking them, and they wanted to know what to do.
Oh dear.
And I was just like, listen, it seems to me, I mean, sure, a property owner has a right to be in a common area, but the HOA also has a right to maintain the common area, more than likely under whatever stuff you got, Yep. So I told him, I would have the nastiest person on your HOA board, the one who loves, picking fights, go out there and tell this person they're going to pay for any like delay that's caused by this. Yeah. And see if that'll get her to move. So I haven't got an update on that one yet, but
my goodness.
That was just yesterday. The other interesting thing is that, and this sort of relates to one of the most common hotline questions we get, probably there's 2 categories of most popular questions on the hotline. And the first one is disclosure. The second one is like, can my client get their due diligence feedback? So do I have to voluntarily disclose something, which is a little bit different than we feel like there's been a misrepresentation or a failure to disclose. Can my client get their money back? This due diligence fee that's otherwise supposed to be non-refundable in most contexts, can my client get their money back? And so those are the two most common questions. And as far as the disclosure one, material fact is just like the definition we have in North Carolina for material fact. I don't even know what to make of it. Anything anything that would affect a person's decision to buy, sell, or rent a property. Okay.
Yeah, that could be anything.
That could be anything depending on the person, right? And so really, to me, I think you start with, what is a material fact? Like it's material. Like you got to sort of imply a reasonable person standard almost. Otherwise, you can get way into crazy town quickly. Yeah. But agents call us all the time. So for example, yesterday, a guy called me and he was like, all right, so I have this space in the house and not the ceiling. Part of the ceiling is 7 foot and part of the ceiling is not, what's the square footage? And so what am I disclosing about the square footage? And I was like, the real estate commission has guidelines on this. So here's what you need to do. Like, here's the rule on this. And things like that, those sorts of disclosure questions, whether I have to volunteer this or not. The really interesting thing about the disclosure questions we get, though, is that for me, material fact is hardly, it often doesn't even factor into whether you should disclose or not because of how litigious this question is now. Just in the last, I would say since, it really started in 21, I think, when courts started like being more open again. North Carolina has been a state that's had such an influx of population from other areas that have different standards about disclosure and things like that, especially. Right. And so it's just been something that, because the non-refundable money in a transaction has gone up so much because of our market, people are willing to litigate it. And because of that, as an agent, then the question is not whether it's a material fact or not. The question is, if someone finds out about this when you didn't say it up front, what is the likelihood that you're either going to face a real estate commission complaint or that you're going to get sued? Those are the questions. Forget material fact. Right. Because if all that happens is you end up getting disciplined, like a reprimand or a state suspension or something like that for failure to disclose, which is probably most likely what you'd end up with in most cases, unless it's very serious. But if it's a minor, most agents, they're out there just doing their best. You know what I mean? And it's not very often that you find someone who's just out there, not trying to be upfront or whatever. It's just not my experience anyway. And so that's not the question, because if you get in front of the commission, you're probably going to be able to explain, listen, I messed up. Like, I'm sorry, and they're not going to rake you over the coals for it. Sure. Some discipline, whatever. That's not the bad thing. The bad thing is, are you going to be stuck in a lawsuit for 2 to 3 years, because of a failure to disclose or a misrepresentation on a septic system? I've had I've had 3 of those cases that almost went to jury trial just in the last couple.
Oh my goodness!
Just on septic.
And jury trial. I mean, most things settle.
I know.
So
but you're getting like up to trial.
Far, and all the attorneys are stressed to the max. They've got all of their trial binders together. And then, there's a little bit of a relief when it settles, but you've done all that work too. And it's not free. No. By the way.
No, definitely not. So a disclosure and, whether my client could get their money back, the due diligence fee for alleged misrepresentation. We actually, NC Realtors released a Q&A. We write, so every Monday in the Realtor Rundown, there's a legal Q&A. And they're all on the ncrealtors.org website. We write those from our law office, and NC Realtors publishes them. They're based usually on hotline calls and things like that. But because this question, can my client get their money back, keeps coming up so much, and because there's rarely a black and white answer I can give. I mean, litigation, the reason it takes so long is because you're doing discovery. Right. You are finding out, what the facts of the case actually are that you will present to either the judge or jury or both, whatever. And so it's one of those things where on a hotline call, I only got one side of the story, and I've got it from someone who has
they've got an angle usually.
It's not like they're disinterested in what the outcome is or the answer, right? And the other thing too is it's, people will take like the Q&As or takes an email I wrote or a conversation I've had and then go around and tell people this is like, gospel.
Yeah, they will.
Yeah, of course. And so I just have to be like careful with what I say. My law partners are too. My other partner now is Adam Stallings. And Bill and Adam are the one principally doing litigation now. But I wrote probably the longest Q&A I've ever written and just went through all the reasons why this is usually not a black and white answer or hotline question. Like these are the things that are going to be explored if you end up in litigation. So
I'm feeling very validated right now because when we get those questions in our office from a client of, can I get my due diligence back? I usually go a little bit of the nerdy route. Obviously, we always say it depends. My husband hates that phrase. Like everything you say, it depends on. I'm like, well, it does. It depends on a lot of stuff. But I'm always talking about how, you're going to have to prove what that person knew and when. And that becomes a question of fact. And those are decided by, depending on the type of trial, judges and juries. Yep. So, questions of fact aren't things that you and I get to decide unless you're going to settle. So there's not some magic procedure that you can go to someone's office and give them a piece of paper and they're gonna be like, yep, you're right. Here's your money. Yep. And people really wish that was the case, but it's just not. So I feel validated that I'm maybe not off on the wrong track here with that. Do you have any, like, if an agent would just go read this, or if they just would use this tool that's available to them, it would solve a lot of their problems? That's a loaded question. So that's really interesting. I think the Q&As, but from my perspective, the Q&As, I read them. I may not catch them every time they come out, but anytime I have a unique situation, I'm on the website in the search bar seeing if there's something about it. So it's a huge resource for me as a real estate attorney. So I'm like, man, I feel like all the agents should read that. Yeah. It's really interesting. I actually have like a lot of sympathy for agents generally because take, for example, forms, right? I come to Martin and Gifford in 2015, like the summer of 2015. I get introduced to all this, and I'm over time learning more and more and more about the forms, right? To this day, 10 years in, I still will read forms I've been through often and not know something was there. Yeah. Like it is so had to expect an agent to just, be able to know all this stuff. Like I just have a lot of sympathy of that is not an expectation I have. So when you call the hotline, it's not like I'm going to have that expectation about, well, did you do your homework? No. But a basic understanding of what the due diligence period is would probably help. that would be nice. That would be nice. But sometimes if we're not there, it's okay. We'll get you there. But in any event, I would say that the biggest thing is a lot of times, and I've been trying to harp on this lately more and more as I go around doing speaking events and stuff like that, is that if you're an agent, most realtors I know, they are focused very, very, very much on client satisfaction. You know what I mean? Like they really want the best outcome for their client. And the problem with that sometimes is that you have to understand there's an end to brokerage. There's a point in your representation or in a transaction where it's just not brokerage anymore. It's a legal dispute. And don't be afraid to back out. And the reason I've been trying to harp on it a little bit more is because as a risk management issue, if you start talking too much to your client, you can expect that stuff to end up later in court. And there's been way too many times that I'll get calls from agents, they're fighting for their client, but they don't really understand that they also have exposure. Or it's not exposure because they've done something wrong. It's exposure because they don't understand when someone gets really upset about the way a transaction has turned out, they're going to blame everyone. Yeah. And that includes you. So you have to understand that there comes a point where if a transaction is going south, talk to your BIC like immediately. And
I'm not saying like circle the wagons. I'm just saying understand what the situation is. Continue to help your client if you can, answer questions, do whatever. But if they really want to have a legal dispute about the money, about a termination, about, if the seller's trying to terminate and they don't have a right to do so under the contract, but they're trying to get out of it, and you're looking at a potential specific performance claim or something like that, that's a situation where you just have to recommend that they go get legal counsel and realize the brokerage part is done.
Yeah.
And you can provide that support, but it's not something you can solve. You're just not Superman.
Yeah.
So
it's
that's
a team sport for a reason.
For sure. So that's one thing that I think would be good as far as like resources and things like that. The Q&As, they're on the website. You don't even have to log in. And the interesting thing is this happens to me, and I don't know if it happens to everybody across the state, but now if I do just a straight up Google search, because let's say I don't think we have a Q&A on it or whatever, I'm looking at something for a hotline question, I do a Google search, the hotline Q&As or the legal Q&As from NC Realtors are popping up in the AI.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh, we do have a Q&A.
Yes. Oh, there it is. Oh, man, my name is on that. I actually wrote that.
I was like,
it's funny.
Oh, yeah, we do have a Q&A on that. And so there's, that resource there, there's a lot of good stuff, on the website. There's a policy and procedure manual. There's a buyer guide, seller guide. I mean, the resources, if you want to go look at it, are there. But just as a practical matter, I think just rewiring how you think about some of these things. Compensation is another one that there's agents feel so confused about it because there are no rules about it anymore. The MLS used to provide this very strict structure for compensation. And you take that away and say, all right, well, you guys get to do whatever you want now. Like you have freedom.
Yeah, constraints can be a very good thing.
Right. And so, for example, one of the things that I'm still getting, it seems to me like too many hotline calls about is just like who's supposed to initiate the conversation about compensation? Does it have to come from the seller? Does it have to come from the listing firm? Does it have to come from the buyer agent? And the answer is either one. Anything, negotiate it, But there's still a lot of disputes about those sorts of things. Just how are we navigating cooperative compensation? I think most people are getting there, but there's still, I think, some places where, there's just not been enough exposure to this new system yet somehow.
Yeah.
That's the case. But in any event, to answer your question, as far as, pointing agents to one particular thing, to me, it's more about an attitude of, where are you at in your transaction? What do you need help with? If you're a realtor, call the hotline. We'll walk you through it and tell you where you're at and what you need to look at. But certainly there's a lot of resources out there as far as like written down stuff.
Yeah. The hotline existing, I think, is amazing. I can't even begin to quantify the amount of legal fees have probably been saved for agents who use the hotline. I mean, 35 calls yesterday in half a day. I'm just doing the mental math of like the cost of a consult and all of that they've saved by using the hotline as a resource. So kudos for that. I'm sure it's not easy. It's a lot of different scenarios and you never know what's coming at you, but you seem to, you're go with the flow, you take it as it comes, right?
Right.
Well, I have taken enough of your time today. I know you have a busy law practice that you got to work on, but I've really enjoyed this. I have, a million personal questions that I'm like holding back from asking. So this has been a treat for me, and thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.